Hello, everyone. I'm Adrian Sanabria, host of the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast and principal researcher at the Defenders Initiative. Welcome to this podcast sponsored by Graylog. I have two guests with me today. Dr. Ed Harris is a CISO, has a doctorate in information assurance and cybersecurity, over 33 years of network and security experience, 12 years in academia teaching computer security at the University of North Carolina, and is a founding member of the Retail Cyber Information Sharing Center. I'm immediately wondering if you maybe know Wendy Nather.
Yeah. Yeah. Before she left, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Because she hired me into 451 Research as a industry analyst. And I remember that's where she went after she left 451. So that popped into my memory when I saw that you were a founding member there. Very cool. All right. Also with us, we have Andrew Green, who is a research analyst on networking security at GiGaOm, has an engineering and product management background at a tier one telco, and is the co-founder of Precism. I hope I said that right, where he produces technical content for enterprise IT. How are you doing, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm doing very good, Adrian. Thank you.
And today we are talking about navigating the shifting SIEM market, challenges, lessons, and strategic insights. If you have a question during this webcast, you can select the Q&A button below. You'll also see a chat button down there. You can ask questions there. We'll monitor that as well, or you can chat with other attendees. So if anything kind of triggers any questions or comments or anything like that, or if you have any experiences you want to share, feel free to drop them in the chat below there, or any questions in the Q&A area. All right. And yeah, let's get going here. So first of all, 2024 was a pretty happening year for the SIEM market. A lot going on, a lot of big shifts, and it seemed like all at once. Am I wrong, Andrew, in thinking that all those big mergers, acquisitions, like that all seemed like in the same week or the same month? Am I remembering things wrong, or how did that go down?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It happened sometime around October that we had at least three announcements of sell-offs and mergers and so on. I think the industry kind of went crazy a bit, but it's been like that for a while now. So it's nothing unexpected. It's just that when you hear all those big names struggling with market, then it's pretty intense.
I think it's the first time, at least the first time in a while, I recall a vendor acquiring a product from another vendor with the intent to essentially shut it down, to move its customers to its product. So I
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, pretty much. But it's probably the most competitive vendor landscape that I've looked at, and I spend about a couple hundred hours yearly, and I've done that for the past 5 years to look at trends. And it's very difficult because there's about 40 SIEM vendors that I came across.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so for example, when we heard that IBM is selling off QRadar, then we know that Curator has been in the market for a very, very long time. And you've got a lot of newer vendors that are popping up, they're entering the market, and they've got the hindsight advantage of building products that don't have the limitations of their predecessors. So this means that any products that don't grow or even shrink have they have to make major decisions like, do we sell this off? Do we merge? Do we acquire somebody else? And so on. So for example, one trend that has been going on since about 2018 or 2019 is that large SIEM vendors are acquiring SOAR products. But new products have SOAR capabilities natively built in. So this is one of the challenges where older solutions have to deal with new market requirements. It's a different kettle of fish when you acquire a new product and then you have to integrate it than when you build it straight off the bat with those new capabilities in there.
Yeah, for
Yeah, I
sure.
think it's interesting. Why be number one when you can be number one and number two by buying your competition? Why build the wheel from the ground up when you can buy a well documented, well executed plan and program and simply implement it? Now, there's some companies who do that really well, some companies who don't. not to mention any names or anything here, but some companies have a track record of buying products, integrating them into their holistic plans, and it really turned out to be a phenomenal offering. But sometimes I've seen products that were acquired and they were gutted of their most valuable features, added to another product, and the original product shut right down, and it represented a loss to customers who were looking, or who utilized that original product, and now they're forced to buy something different that might be now out of their range.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. I was a QRadar customer right around when they were getting acquired by IBM, and it was a frustrating time because IBM was, I think the term is blue washing,
Hmm.
and they changed the UI to match everything. It's got to work in 74 languages. Like this, got this whole checklist, that you have to go down to turn a product into an IBM product. And it was kind of hard to get bugs fixed, feature enhancements that we really wanted at that time. And it's interesting. Like I remember they had one product that only one customer used. It must have been a big customer, but like this management risk manager product that would simulate changes to your environment. So you could say, what if I do this with this firewall rule here? And didn't quite fit in with everything. I don't think it made the shift over
Hmm.
from QN Labs to IBM there. But Ed, you've been around a while, and we've both been around a while. I set up my first, I think, deployed my first SIEM in 2004, which was RSA Envision back then. I was just
Wow.
cleaning up my office here and found a little plaque that said I was RSA Envision certified. um,
Yeah, you
like
dated yourself big time there.
absolutely, and yeah, back when it was network intelligence too, before that acquisition. Um, how do you look at the sim market now, 20, 25 years on, it's in some ways, I feel like the promises ArcSight was making back in 2006, we're still not quite there. We still can't quite do what they were going for back then with correlation and things like that. Um, how were there any surprises with the market changes this year to you, or is it just you see it as the natural evolution of the market?
No, I mean, what we're experiencing is a maturation of the environment. Yeah, there are a lot of vendors, and we're going to find those that they're gonna consolidate. We're going to find stronger vendors are going to emerge. Those and one of the things I look for in a vendor is whether they're seeking to venture outside of their swim lane. How many times have you seen a vendor who's really good at what they do, and they said, you know what? I'm going to add some new widgets to it. It's not really core business to what we do, but it's a nice feature enhancement. And then you find out that they've turned a good product into a mediocre product because they're trying to do more and they're trying to cater to the masses. I would almost I would almost prefer, one product solving one topic instead of trying to be all end all to everybody uh, in the customer base. But if you're really good at what you do, customers are going to flock to you because you're fast, you're efficient, you've got a good model, it works. You've hopefully matured within your own product space to the extent that you're drawing customers in because they want the quality of your offering and not a be all end all solution.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's a classic product strategy blunder is to try and be everything to everyone
Hmm.
and just get so bloated. And Sims are definitely, they've been guilty of that in the past. Just want
Yeah.
to throw the question to the audience. How are attendees feeling about these market shifts we've discussed? Are vendor consolidations and evolving threats driving your evaluation of new solutions? And Andrew, I think you were about to comment on that.
Yeah, I was about to say, it happens all the time. So you don't get just SIEM anymore. It has to be SIEM plus SOAR, as I mentioned, plus the XDR, plus
Right.
behavior
Plus, plus.
analytics, and so on. It's all now security operations platforms. But I think one of the reasons why it happens is because um, given enough time, any security operations product will essentially become a SIEM, because the moment you go into ingestion, retention, and detection, you're entering SIEM territory, and it's very hard to handle that graciously, let's say. So you end up with those very, very big products that do everything and not necessarily everything well.
Yeah. You bring up a good point because, for the people who have to do PCI, the SIEM is not just a SecOps platform, a SOC platform, right? It's also a compliance and regulatory tool as well. Like you have to retain that stuff, for DFIR teams, you need some of that older data. Maybe you discover a breach that occurred a couple of months ago, and you better hope you have logs going back that far, or that the retention goes back that far. We've seen some breaches certainly where even Microsoft didn't have logs going back far enough to discover the origin of the breach, right? So it's a good point, calling out. We think of the SecOps use case a lot, but there's other use cases for SIEMs as well, right?
Yeah, and it's funny you say that. I was speaking with one of my colleagues. We're looking at not the SIEMs, so SIEMs that don't call themselves SIEMs. And the moment you have to take into mind those compliance use cases, and the auditor asks you, "What do you use for SIEM?" And then you say a product that's not a SIEM. Do you check the box or don't you check the box? So you're just making your life harder, essentially.
Yeah. So Ed, coming back to you, what do you see? I imagine some of these challenges, especially as the definition of what a SIEM is changes over time. What are some of the major challenges you see organizations have in selecting a SIEM these days?
Yeah, probably the fundamental, starting point is, do I buy, do I rent, or do I build? How many companies have started off with, I don't know what I need, but I know I need to collect logs, so I'm going to start with building something on my own where I can just simply start collecting logs, dropping them into a JBOD, and I've got them, but I don't know what to do with them afterwards because I've got no reporting interface, I've got no way to search, and then I begin asking the questions. Well, what is the market bearing? Who are the major players? I know people like to use the Gartner Magic Quadrant, using Forrester research reports and things of that nature to say who are the more mature players in the space, and then asking themselves, well, should I go out and buy a solution? Do I bring it in house? Do I rent it from somebody? And rent has two connotations. I can rent a platform and bring it on-prem, but I could also rent a platform as a managed solution. And if I do bring it on-prem, do I leave it in my data center? Can I store it in a private cloud? Is that still considered on-prem enough? And a lot of it depends on what your requirements are based on your market vertical. Some companies that are highly regulated, it has to be on-prem or in a private cloud at a minimum, because you can't allow some of that regulated data to be in a public offering. But some of the other questions that challenges are, do I know what my log volume looks like? And do I know how much disk space that takes up? And do I know what my retention periods are? I mean, these are things that, and fortunately, some of the bigger organizations that offer, these SIEM solutions, they at least have a spreadsheet that help you figure this stuff out. If you've got a number of Unix servers, then Unix servers generate a certain number of logs based on the level of logging that you've turned on, and you can kind of estimate how much logs you need for a Unix environment and for your network infrastructure environment, your router, switches, Wi-Fi devices, IP phones, connected printers and scanners and things of that nature. And then you've got your networking environment, which is your Active Directory, and those generate even more logs because you're logging on not just the logins, the health of the environment, the application environment, and so understanding what your log volume looks like and how much space that's required to hold that, and then how long you have to hold that for, depending on whether, how regulated you are. You need it for banking data, it's 7 years, PCI is has its own time requirements. And oh, by the way,
Yeah.
and if you are an international organization, you've got some federal laws in other countries that have to be observed for retention periods. And then you ask
Yeah.
yourselves, okay, do I go out and buy full-time employees to run this? Can I rent some staff to run it on-prem? And if I'm going to do it in the cloud as a managed offering, well, then I'm renting somebody else's staff. But then I've got to keep them trained. They have to be updated on their certs, most likely. They have to be educated on the next things that are coming out that affect the SIM environment. So there's a lot of questions
Hmm.
that companies have to consider when they're looking about them. And oh, by the way, probably the biggest thing, what's my plan to derive the value from this offering of getting into working with a SIM to start with? Because that's what the
Yeah.
companies really want to know, is, or at least the business part of the business is how do I get value right away from bringing this in house?
Yeah, so just to share, like my early experience, the first time I implemented that RSA and vision system, my focus was okay. We're going to shove as much stuff in here as we can. Like I just went down the list of the parsers they had and matched it up with products and technologies that we had, and I just started pumping logs into it. And before you knew it, I had over 1,700 devices reporting in there, 100 million events a day, and I hadn't even thought of outcomes, right? Like,
Hmm.
because the main reason we bought it, it was PCI budget, that got it
Right.
for us. This was a large, at the time, the sixth largest payment processor in the world that I was working at, and we didn't consider what the goals were for the SIM,
Hmm.
So what we got was a SIM with a lot of data in it. Oftentimes it took queries 8 hours to complete. This was before solid state storage. This was before big data technology, so I think RSA Envision was using a flat file Sybase ASA database back then. And I just created this nightmare to manage, just to make sure storage didn't fill up
Right.
before we even got to, okay, what alerts do we need? What reports do we need? What's important to look at here? We didn't even know what was in half of these logs. We had to just go look at the raw logs to familiarize ourselves with what we had pulled into the system. So that's maybe a question there, like how many customers are thinking outcome first when they purchase one of these products, and when they implement it versus, as you point out, for regulatory reasons, yeah, maybe you do have to just pump a whole lot of stuff in there because it just has to be there regardless of
Yeah.
if you have a active use case for it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because sometimes we're not sure what direction we need to take this, but we know we need to be retaining our logs, and so how many times have you just let's just get it into the SIM, let's make sure that it's captured. We'll go back and make sure that our parsers properly categorize the data, and so that it understands what it's reading, because you take a raw log, and then all it is a raw log. The SIM says, well, I received a string of data, and one was this long and the next one was that long. And now I don't know what I'm looking at, but I know that I've got it, and I know that it can't be deleted because I've got some data protections in the JBOD where the data resides, and that's nice. But then again, back to that question of what's your plan to derive value out of how you can't run reports on raw data unless you've got really a super intelligent SIM that's capable of doing that. But now companies are coming out. It's like, well, we've got the top parsers for the top equipment, and oh, by the way, we've also got a service where we can help you write a parser for just about anything as long as you give
Yeah,
us some sample data. And that's great, because
and some
now,
money.
yeah, that really is helpful for the person that's got to buy the SIM, and understand that I'm going to get value day one,
Mhm.
just because there's such a rich parser base, and then be able to turn that into reports where people can take action in a timely manner.
Yeah. And Andrew, you mentioned earlier, the challenge of trying to convince your auditor that what you're using is indeed a SIM, even though maybe it's not marketed as one or sold as one. So that's a great opportunity to jump into the question of in 2025, what even is a SIM? Because I think we see a lot of fragmentation in the market now, a lot of things that are kind of purpose-built SIMs for specific use cases. Again, going back to that SecOps, that SOC example. So, maybe has that changed? Is that something that's evolving and changing? What is a SIM in 2025?
Well, I think the basic definition of a SIEM hasn't changed, and I don't think it's going to change mainly because um, it's what you need to do. I don't think we have an alternative at the moment. So what is a SIEM? As I mentioned, it's a tool that can ingest, store, detect, and investigate. And then over that, if you're looking at stuff like response or analytics and stuff like that, that is bonus points. But you really need to make sure that you have these 4 pillars down for a tool to actually be called a SIEM. And yeah, as you mentioned, it's yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything else. So let's
Yeah.
cut that one out, Rick.
Yeah, and just kind of moving on from that, we've seen the term next gen come into it.
Yeah.
In the firewall world, at least in my mind, next gen has a very specific meaning. It means there's visibility into layer 7, right? It was application
Mhm.
aware, knew more than just data's going over 443, right? Like it could tell the difference between Dropbox, the client, and Dropbox in a web browser. Uh, so what does it have as specific a meaning when we see the term next gen applied to SIMs? Or is
I
it
don't think
just
it
more of a new versus old?
Yeah, I don't think it does. And I'll be a bit pedantic here in the sense that I don't think I've seen a SIEM in the past year that is not calling themselves a next-gen SIEM. So
Okay.
by definition, if everybody is a next-gen SIEM, then nobody is a next-gen SIEM. But
I
without
like it.
being pedantic, I think what they're referring to is the SIEM based on microservices? Is it cloud native? Does it have
Oh, okay.
native capabilities for SOAR, XDR, UEBA, and so on? Does it implement machine learning to help you with detection rules? Does it have detection as code? Um, does it have integrations with security data lakes? Are you implementing AI agents or AI stock agents,
Mhm.
as they call them now, which is essentially a glorified LLM with some guardrails that can go through some data and then give you some response back. So that's what I think they mean by next-gen SIEM. The name itself is not really meaningful, so I would suggest looking into those components that I mentioned to identify whether it actually is something that you need, because it may be the case that you don't need. And if you don't have those features or you don't have the right maturity to adopt those features, then you don't need to look into those types of capabilities.
Right. Yeah, I do
Yeah,
remember.
I
Go ahead,
completely
Rick.
agree with Andrew on that. I mean, you know, the evolution of the product itself, it's still a great big log collector. Yes, it does some neat, fancy things. And again, to the extent that it gets outside of its swim lane of what is in a traditional SIM market. But yeah, being able to look at a raw log and say, oh, I recognize this raw log. It was miscategorized by a parser, and it should have been X instead of Y. That's very handy, because what that does is that helps ensure that if it was misconfigured, because how many companies have decided to do their own configuration rather than hire the configuration folks from the manufacturer and do it on their own, because they need to save the money on such a task. But I can see where AI is going to play an interesting part in the market of this in the future.
Yeah, managing large amounts of text is a thing that it does well, and yeah, I've seen technology in the past where people tried to automate the generation of parsers, which is one of the most painful things. I remember going through a week-long class just to learn the tools that RSA and Vision had for building custom parsers. And looking back on what that process looked like, and having a couple years experience with generative AI now, I feel comfortable saying that that should be a pretty easy, that should be a slam dunk use case for some of this technology to generate and manage that parser for you instead of like you were pointing out, Ed, how many people do you have to hire to manage this SIEM? And can that knock down that requirement a bit, some of these new features?
Yeah,
And
and another interesting part of that about the full-time employee aspect of that is how many and so here's a specific pain point I've dealt with in the past. How many times have you hired an analyst to work in the SOC who works specifically on the SIEM? You get them trained up, they've got access to a great set of skills and tools, and then they're hired away by somebody who's paying greater salary.
yeah,
And you've just lost an investment in somebody's education. You've just lost, the tribal knowledge associated with your business, just because somebody thought their skill set was more valuable someplace else.
yeah. Yeah, and Andrew, just to kind of parrot what you were saying and summarize, it sounds like while the fundamental columns, the foundation of what is required from a SIEM hasn't changed, applying that next gen label kind of says that well, you don't really want to do it like we were doing it back in 2010, right? Like there's customer expectations have shifted. There's expectation that certain things are going to be easier, that maybe you don't need a full FTE just to manage storage for the SIEM or something like that, like something maybe we had to do in the past. Now that we've got SIEM as a service and, fully cloud-based SIEM and things like that, maybe there are folks out there that don't want that experience of running everything on-prem again if they don't absolutely have to. Does that sound accurate? Yeah.
Yeah, it does sound accurate. So there are different customer expectations, and I do want to make a point. Another thing that is often overlooked when you generally talk about the products is how easy they are to use on a day-to-day basis, particularly how fast they are. And I remember I had a demo from an open source tool a while ago, and it was so fast. It was incredible. I asked them, "Are you running this locally?" He said, "No, it's in the cloud." And, "Well, how is it so fast?" It was as fast as an Excel spreadsheet. Like, I kid you not. I said, "Oh, we're doing this microservices thing. You can have a look at our architecture. Send me a link to the technical documentation." And it wasn't anything outstanding. It was just very, very well executed. And it's something like that, for example, I don't want to say, monolith means slower, but if you are inheriting a lot of legacy code, and you have some, workaround ways of interpreting data and so on, it may be slower than what you would actually want for today's volume of data that you want to look at and analyze.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly found it frustrating when I was running an investigation and I got an estimate of 8 hours for my query time. I don't even know if I put together the right syntax for the query. Like maybe it's going to come back with an error after 8 hours. Like there's so much experimentation that goes into that, and hopefully that's something generative AI can help us with as well. Not having to memorize query languages going forward. Being able to just use natural language and
Right.
yeah, and it figures out the the correct technical SQL on the back end or whatever that query language looks like. But yeah, speed is super important for a lot of these use cases because time is important for a lot of these use cases, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you don't want to switch between tabs while you're running a query and then you forget what you're doing and then you have to context switch again and so on. So in that point, actually, AI agents can also do something. You write them what to do, and then they can go ahead and do it, and you don't need to be as invested in it. The one caveat I want to say, two caveats actually, with those agents. First, you still need to be trained and know what to ask for, because if you give an untrained person an AI agent, they're not going to be any better than an untrained person without an AI agent. And then the second one is about accountability of the AI agent, as in if it is missing something or if it gives you some incorrect data back, then whose responsibility is it? And this is, I guess, the maturation point of the whole LLM generative AI market, where you're trying to implement multiple techniques that can, minimize those sort of inconsistencies and mistakes that LLMs can make. So if you are looking for a tool that has those sort of capabilities, it's also worth looking into how they can minimize hallucinations and incorrect data and so on.
Yeah, for sure. And just want to throw a quick question to the SIEM as we kind of wrap up this category of questions here. Did we mention all the challenges that you're having? Did we miss any? So maybe you can jump into the chat and kind of list out anything that maybe we missed and discuss it there, or tell us if there's anything big that we missed there. Yeah, so moving on to kind of some of the insights in the market here that we're seeing. Ed, two factors that seem to always come up, and they've already come up in our conversation here when discussing implementing SIEMs is cost and labor. It's been a while since I bought a SIEM, so I don't know if it's still all about EPS, events per second, like the how quickly you can consume the stuff. Maybe these days it's more metered by storage. I know, there's some vendors out there that kind of reinvented how things are licensed here. But certainly that labor piece as well was kind of a, back in the day, especially when I was an analyst, I used to say that they should put the requirements on the box. Like, again, dating myself, when you go out and buy a video game, you had to look at the requirements on the box, to see if you'd be able to run the game at a decent speed when you got home, because everybody's PC was different. Everybody's business is different. And I've been saying that for years, that vendors need to give enterprises some idea of how much labor they need to throw at this thing to be able to get value out of it, right?
Yeah, yeah, and certainly this gets back to the fundamental question of does the business understand their use case? What are you trying to solve for? And when you get those questions answered up front from a business perspective, you then open up an RFP. You look at a handful of vendors that you think are capable of solving your use cases, and then ask them to say, I've got these 7, 10, 15 use cases. How can you solve this for me? And they'll look at it, and I really appreciate vendors who will come back and say, you know what? I can take care of 90% of your use cases, but that last 10% I just can't accommodate. And I really appreciate that open and honest feedback, because it lets me know right away whether or not I need to continue to at least consider that vendor just based on their honesty alone. But certainly I've got use cases that have to be accounted for. And part of that dog and pony show is not only can you demonstrate that you can solve my use cases, but what an implementation would look like if we use their particular product. And it may come back to say, you know what, you have to have 3 to 5 full-time employees in order to run this, or you can run it with 50% of an employee, because there's so much automation that the tool really kind of manages itself. And those are nice things. But yeah, it really should come with an, oh, by the way, if you buy our solution, here's what you have to have. We're going to sell you a search engine. You have to have your own drive space, which is great. You can drop it into a cloud solution or something like that, and have indefinite drive space. Do you have the I/O? Is the I/O and the compute more expensive if you're doing it in the cloud versus on-prem? If your company has a propensity to grow exponentially, can the product scale up and scale down quickly? We had quite a few acquisitions in 2024. I expect more acquisitions in 2025. What does that do for my log volume? How is it going to increase? Because, oh, by the way, we're also looking at organizations in other countries, and I've got a new set of dynamics that I need to consider, new use cases that I didn't consider in my original acquisition of my SIEM. And how has the company, the manufacturer, how can you help me be successful to dynamically change that on the fly when my shifting sands are shifting sands, and we've just increased our our company by 50% because we just bought a competitor. These are
Right.
the ability for that vendor to be able to pivot quickly to help me be successful. Those are important things that I look at.
Yeah, maybe when you bought it, you didn't realize you needed a GDPR use case, that you needed a workflow for that, but yeah, you made that acquisition, over somewhere in the EU, and now you need it, right?
Yep. Yeah. PIPL in China, LGPD in Brazil.
Yeah.
These are regulations that I have to be cognizant of.
Yeah, and a lot of data finds its way into SIM. I've seen a lot of crazy stuff in a SIM that maybe shouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
That yeah, a lot of weird quirks. We were talking about QRadar. One of the things it would do is it would grab chunks of packets, of network packets, right? And so you would have raw wire data in there, and if something wasn't encrypted, like somebody was using just non-encrypted LDAP, all of a
Hmm.
sudden you'd see your coworkers' passwords floating through your SIM, or you'd see clear text credit card data just floating through your SIM. Now you need to go in and figure out why that's happening and scrub the data and yeah,
Yeah, and so obviously, you also have to have a staff that you can trust. You look at folks in the infosec space. If you can't trust them, they need to not be on your team. So obviously, a little bit of candor goes a long way there. But certainly, from the vendor perspective, I want to be able to go in and grab a log type and dump it after a certain period of time. I need antivirus logs, but I don't need them longer than a year because they're not valuable longer than a year. So to be able to capture that log when it occurs, to capture it in the volume that it's occurring, and then be able to purge it after 365 days, that's valuable. Whereas I might need login information that lasts beyond 365 days, depending on what market vertical I'm in.
and so this question, either of you, if you have any ideas on this, feel free to chime in. But we talked about all the different ways that you can now consume a SIM. Back in the day, it was all on-prem. But now there's cloud managed options. There's fully managed options. There's kind of hybrid models there. Um, I'm kind of curious about uh, both the frequency of this is pretty much everybody all in on cloud SaaS SIMs these days, or there's still quite a bit of on-prem stuff you're seeing out there? And also, is everyone implementing kind of from this, okay, let's shove everything in there first and then figure it out? Or are you seeing more people strategic about what kind of data they want to throw in there, more hesitant about throwing too much in there and creating a kind of a management nightmare?
Yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting question. I think that really, so the first part to your question is, on-prem versus the cloud. I think it really depends on the market vertical you're in. If you're a federal government, it's probably going to be an on-prem solution somewhere. If you're the banking industry, probably on-prem. Medical field, probably on-prem. We are, I would imagine, uh, that to the degree that some of these vendors who manufacture these products are passing, at least from a U.S. perspective. There's FedRAMP certifications that indicate that it meets the federal government guidelines for the United States, and therefore storing it in a solution like that has met those rigid requirements might imply that there can be a shift from an on-prem to a cloud-based solution. And I don't really have a whole lot of experience in that area. I've been out of the federal government for quite some time now. And I certainly, even to Andrew's perspective, I don't see that so much outside of the United States. Andrew, do you have any perspective that you can offer?
Uh, Hands-on perspective, not really.
Okay.
Advice, take it with a grain of salt, but I would suggest essentially going for the easiest option that you can get away with. And if we were to make a rough recommendation list, it would be as a managed service, as a service, or some sort of self-hosted one. So if you have those compliance requirements, as you were saying, Dr. Harris, let's say you are a government entity, you want to have them, you want to self-host them, or perhaps in a private cloud, in a trusted partner or something like that, then it is best to go with options that have self-hosted. If you don't have those requirements and you're just looking for the security operations part of it, then I would recommend evaluating as a service solutions, which includes both. It's something that is hosted in the cloud by the vendor, and I just consume it via a web interface, and then all the storage is in the cloud and so on, because it relieves some of that internal pressure of having to hire people, as you were mentioning, and managing the solution. Or you can even have those managed SIEM as a service, which essentially means that you are essentially sending your logs to a third party. They manage the SIEM. If something happens, they're going to take care of it, more or less, depending on their business model. This one obviously has more risk associated with it because it has to be a trusted partner that you can actually send your logs to, that you actually trust them with your security operations. If do they actually have the right staff? Do they have the right incident response playbooks and so on? So kind of the middle ground between those two is the software as a service option, which is where most new vendors are also entering. So I can just have it deployed, for example, in a vendor-hosted cloud environment or in my own hosted cloud environment. I can have my own AWS account. I procure it through the marketplace. It's in there. There is a bit more management when you host it in your own cloud environment, but still it's easier than having to actually go in and put the boxes in the data center and then adding more boxes in the data center when you need to, and so on.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I do like the managed SOC model, the managed SIEM model, because with the signing of a check, I can have a service up and running by the end of the day. Immediately, I can start gathering logs, and somebody who knows how to run the SIEM, who already has it configured, can simply consume that for me and then give me the data. And what that does is that buys me a little bit of time to make a better informed decision as to whether or not I need to bring that in-house. And some of the models that I've seen with some of the SIEM vendors today is that they have the ability to export the data and you know out of internet hosted model and you know get it into an on-prem model. And that's a big selling point as far because that gives me the opportunity to make a better determination after I've got the service up and running, whether or not I need to bring it in-house. And obviously it would be better if I understood all of my use cases to start with. But in a case where I've just got to have something right away, a managed service model is a great model.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think anything that that helps you get away from the management portion of it, the overhead that you get from I just remember how much time we spent just figuring out how to get stuff in there. And I suppose you still have this to some extent where one day you go in, you look at your SIEM and the Linux logs aren't there anymore. Why aren't the Linux logs there? I'll go talk to the Linux admins. Or these days, again, showing my age here, the DevOps folks maybe they were messing with the syslog.conf, and they forgot to include the UDP 514 for the remote collector, or how the agent, or they rebuilt the standard image that they use maybe on Docker containers, something like that, left the agent that forwards the logs off of there, something like that. So you're hunting down that kind of stuff. And it's, yeah, I see anything that gets you away from doing that kind of stuff and more focused on, okay, how do we get value out of this? What alerts do we need? How do we detect more attacks and things like that, as a big plus.
Yeah, agreed. And one of the neat features when we talked about next gen SIEM, when a SIEM is used to seeing a regular flow of data from a particular log type and doesn't, one of the neat features that I've seen in the marketplace is the SIEM says, I expected to have seen Cisco logs at least 35,000 a minute, and for some reason it's dropped down to 10,000 a minute.
Yeah.
And that and that it's enough at least to trigger somebody to go take a look and figure out what's going on and why did that drop down? Well, maybe we've got an upgrade going on and it was a planned event. Maybe it was an unplanned event. Maybe, if you've got VPN tunnels between various aspects of your business, there might be a tunnel down but at least you're informed and you know how to go and take action.
Right.
And you can answer the question if an auditor comes up and says, wow, you normally have 35,000 logs a minute and you drop down to 10,000. What happened there? Oh, here was a ticket in the service desk. We had a branch of the business that was down for a planned software upgrade, and it helps you
Yeah,
answer.
I've seen so many breaches, especially ransomware ones where you find out, oh yeah, they stole 35 terabytes of data. It's like there's no way, like if you're looking at log and event volume, that there wasn't a spike somewhere that somebody should have
Right.
investigated and said that's not normal. That's not a normal amount of data exfil, and certainly not to that FTP server in Russia.
Yeah, and obviously knowing what's normal in your environment. If you're gathering logs from everything, you should be gathering logs from your edge firewalls. And as soon as they see a spike, that should trigger an alert and said, "Hey, network firewall team, what's going on in your world?" We just saw something rather large, something that's abnormally large for our normal operating environment, traverse the edge.
Yeah.
Enough to ask a question.
As we start to wrap up the conversation here, Andrew, do you think we can, acquisitions, divestitures, mergers, do you think we'll see some more activity like that in the SIM market in 2025?
Definitely. I don't think there's going to slow down. Perhaps we're not going to have another IBM selling off to Palo Alto, but
Yeah.
we're going to have a lot of movement. And the biggest one I'm seeing is around those purpose-built AI SOC agents. So
Yeah.
you've got a bunch of startups have been popping up since about 2023. They're actually doing quite well now. At the moment, they just bolt on top of a SIEM. I
Hmm.
expect those are going to be acquired like hotcakes in the next few years.
Assuming they work, right?
Assuming they work, but as I mentioned, um, it comes down to if I am a SIEM and I want to acquire this, would I be able to take accountability for this product, give it to the customer? If something goes wrong with it, whose fault is it? It's a bit like self-driving cars. If a self-driving car has an accident, is it the driver? Is it the manufacturer? Who is it?
Right.
So I think that's one of the biggest areas that we're going to see, subject to regulations, accountability, and so on.
I love that analogy to the cars. Yeah, because if you're going to outsource that responsibility, yeah, where does the finger get pointed, and does it do you any good to even point a finger? If the responsibility is still ultimately on the enterprise, I guess, regardless of what the tool does. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out as we become more dependent on AI to detect and even respond to things.
Yeah, I don't think at any point that responsibility on the vendor is going to be a real thing. If I'm going to buy a tool and give it to my security operations team, it is going to be up to them. We saw the SolarWinds CISO, for example,
Yeah.
getting demolished by SEC. So I don't think, for example, you can outsource that responsibility and somehow get away with it. At the same time, vendors that do offer those types of tools should be cognizant of that, and do their best to get involved, mitigate, perhaps get involved into incident response forensics and so on to
Yeah.
make that impact a bit less.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I saw AWS now has incident response services. Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, it makes sense. And Ed, as we wrap here, any tips to give to the audience, to people considering maybe moving to a new SIM or implementing a new one? Any pitfalls to watch out for?
Um, you know, part of the, if you're going to change out your SIM from one vendor to another, I mean, there needs to be some fundamental, valuable, tangible things on the table, like um, there should be a significant cost reduction, or maybe the cost of ongoing support, or maybe a cost savings in training, employees to, to use the SIEM. If we're moving from something, we'll just use QRadar because they were in the news recently. That's a significant platform. If you're moving to a smaller SIEM because you realize you don't need the Cadillac, and I don't want to put a label on QRadar and say they're the Cadillac, but they are a very mature product. But you might realize that I bought something too big. I bought a 5-bedroom house. I really only needed a 3-bedroom house. I don't need to put as much maintenance into that house because it's smaller. I can do more maintenance myself. So there's probably some tangible cost benefits of why you would want to move from one product to another, and maybe and it may entirely be that the 3-bedroom house that you need to move to the 5-bedroom house. Your family's expanding, and now you need to add more because the product that you had in the past is it's no longer sufficient. So there's again, it's understanding your use cases, what you're solving for, because what you built in the beginning was where your company was at the time. Your company's changing on a regular basis. You've got to account for new constructs, and sometimes you need to build a bigger house, and sometimes you need to downsize.
Yeah, good advice. All right. So we're going to wrap up at this point. Thanks to everybody who joined us today. Thanks to our sponsor, Graylog, for making today's webcast possible. And thanks to both you, Dr. Harris, and Andrew, for joining us today. Doing
Thank
great.
you for having me.
My pleasure.
All right. Thanks again to the audience for joining us, and we'll see you next time.